Hello, this is 1.2 and this is the major muscles of the body. This includes the movement, the muscle, origin, insertion, and antagonist. This is the first section. This is the shoulder joint. So the movement of the anterior, there are three parts of the deltoid. There are the anterior, posterior, and medial or middle part of the deltoid. So the anterior deltoid performs flexion of the shoulder with the origin of the clavicle and the scapula at the insertion on the humerus. The antagonist is the latissimus dorsi on the back. Now, all three anterior, posterior, and medial deltoids all have the same insertion of the humerus and antagonist of latissimus dorsi. However, each section of the insertion of the anterior deltoid on the humerus is at a different point. Posterior deltoid performs extension of the shoulder, the origin of the clavicle and scapula, and the movement at the medial deltoid is the abduction of the shoulder. The clavicle and scapula also as the origin. Notice all three have clavicle and scapula as the origin, just on different sections of these. The latissimus dorsi is the agonist, with the adduction of the humerus and extension of the shoulder at this point. The origin is the lower thorax and all of the lumbar vertebrae and the ilium, with an insertion of the humerus. The antagonist of the latissimus dorsi agonist muscle is the deltoid and the trapezius. When the agonist is the rotator cuff muscles, it can perform a movement of abduction, internal rotation, and external rotation of the shoulder at the origin of the humerus, insertion of the scapula, and the antagonist of the deltoid. The pectoralis major is the agonist. It can perform a very wide range of movements with medial rotation of the humerus, flexion of the shoulder, horizontal shoulder flexion, and downwards diagonal shoulder flexion with horizontal adduction at the humerus, at the origin point of the clavicle and sternum, with the humerus and upper rib cage segments as the insertion, and the deltoid as the antagonist of the pectoralis major at the shoulder joint. Now at the radio-ulnar and elbow and knee joints, the supinator as the agonist, the movements are obviously supination. This is in the radio-ulnar segment. Origin is the humerus, the insertion as the ulnar, with the antagonist of the pronator quadratus muscle. Now moving on to the pronator teres, the movement is the pronation of the radio-ulnar segment. The origin is the humeral head, so further up than the regular humerus that the supinator is origin to. The insertion is also the ulnar, with an antagonist of the supinator. Notice that these are connected. Now at the elbow, the biceps brachii performs a movement of flexion extension, as well as the triceps brachii performing flexion extension, both with the origin of the scapula, only connecting different segments, the insertion of the biceps brachii being radius, and the insertion of the triceps brachii being the upper ulnar. The antagonist for the biceps brachii is the triceps brachii, and the antagonist for the biceps brachii is the triceps brachii. Now moving on to the knee joint, the hamstring is the agonist. The knee can flex, extend, and the femur of the hip, with the origin of the ischium and the femur, with an insertion of the tibia, fibula. Antagonist of the hamstring agonist is the rectus femoris. Now the agonist as the quadriceps, you can extend the lower leg and the knee flexes with the femur at the hip, The origin is the femur and the ilium, with the insertion of the tibia, the antagonist of the hamstrings. Now onto the hip joint, where the agonist, as the iliopsoas, movement is flexion at the hip, the origin of the psoas, the insertion as the lesser trochanter, and the antagonist as the gluteus maximus. Now moving on to the gluteus maximus as the agonist, not the antagonist. The movement can extend at the hip laterally, rotating the femur. The origin of the ilium, insertion of the femur, and antagonist as the psoas and the iliac ascus. Now going on to the gluteus medius and minimus. They rotate and abduct the thigh, with the origin of also the ilium and also the insertion of the femur, very the same as gluteus maximus and medius minimus. However, the antagonist is the adductors. So as the adductors as the agonist now, the movement can be performed as flexion and abduction at the hip joint, with the origin of the ramus, the insertion of the femur, the antagonist of the gluteus maximus. Now moving lower down, you go to the tibialis anterior, the agonist. The movement can be dorsiflexion and inversion. The origin is the tibia, the insertion as the tarsals and metatarsals, the antagonist, tibialis posterior. This is at the calf muscle, so the gastrocnemius and the solealis as the agonist, with the movement as plantar flexion instead of dorsiflexion. It's because it's on the other side. The origin is the femur and tibia. Insertion is the calcaneus, with the antagonist as the tibialis anterior. Now at the spine, when we go to the agonist of the internal obliques and external obliques, they can both move in lateral rotation, slight lateral rotation, and slight flexion. The origin of the internal obliques is the iliac crest, but the origin of the external obliques is the anterolateral border of the lower 8 of the ribs. The insertion of the internal obliques is the pubic crest, the costal cartilage, and ribs from 8 to 12. The external obliques is also inserted at the pubic crest, but the iliac crest and the anterior rectus sheath is the insertion point. The antagonist of the internal obliques is the rectus abdominis, also as the transverse abdominis, as well as this being the same for the external obliques. The rectus abdominis movement types are constriction, anterior support, flexion of the vertebrae, and rotation. The origin of the rectus abdominis is the pubis and the ribs, along with the ilium. The insertion point is the sternum, ilium, pubis, and the ribs, with the antagonist being the erector spinae. The erector spinae as the agonist now, the movement of the extension of vertebrae, the origin, sacrum ilium, and the vertebrae being the origin, the insertion being the ribs, vertebrae, the base of the skull, and the antagonist being the rectus abdominis. These can all very clearly be seen on this diagram. The pectoralis major, the deltoids, biceps, triceps, latissimus dorsi, trapezius, deltoids, trapezius here, gluteus maximus, quadriceps, gluteus medius, calf, gastrocnemius, tibialis anterior, gastrocnemius here. All of these muscles that we've just described, the shoulder joint, the radial ulnar, elbow, knee joint, hip joint, and the spine joint, all shown on this diagram.